Okay, everybody, welcome to our third Strawberry Seed Consulting webinar on leave entitlements, answering your most frequently asked questions that we see here at Strawberry Seed. I'd like to start by acknowledging that this webinar is being held on the traditional lands of the Wallabong people, and I'd like to acknowledge them as traditional owners. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present and Aboriginal elders of other communities who might be with us today. As we go along, if you do have any questions, I encourage them to put them into the Q&A box. And at the end, hopefully we will be able to answer as many questions as we can. And I am also recording this session today, so you'll be able to look back later if you want to check any of the things we discussed. We'll also put a recording on our website and send you a copy of the slides. Okay, let's get started. So my name is Carly Saw. I'm the Director of Strawberry Seed Consulting. Here's some of my wonderful team. It also happens to be our 9th birthday today. I didn't really think about that when I booked this in for tonight. So it's been 9 years since I registered the business name Strawberry Seed Consulting 9 years ago in 2013. And since then, we've helped hundreds and hundreds of small businesses with their HR needs, and we work with clients all across the country. So why is it important to understand leave entitlements? Every employee in Australia has the right to leave entitlements under the Fair Work Act, and those entitlements are laid out under the National Employment Standards, and the National Employment Standards cover all employees regardless of whether they're covered by an award. So anyone that's been to one of our webinars will have seen this slide, because I think it is important to reiterate the industrial system that we work under. So the National Employment Standards are part of the Fair Work Act, and they form the basis of all of our employment law. The next level in our system is an industrial instrument. Now that could be an award or it could be an enterprise agreement. And the third layer is then a contract or an employment agreement that you can put in place within your business. So the NES, or the National Employment Standards, are kind of like the 10 commandments of employment law, and they cover things like 38 hours a week is full-time work, public holidays, notice of termination and pay, but they also cover all the leave entitlements that I'll be going through today. Now, it's also important to understand which award or industrial instrument, which could be an enterprise bargaining agreement, will actually apply to your business. Because when we're talking about these leave entitlements, there may be some additional entitlements that are covered in an industrial instrument that either covers a profession in your business or the industry that your business is covered by. So it is important to always double check whether there is anything covered on leave in the industrial instrument. And the third layer is the employment agreement. So it is possible to offer more than the minimum, and that would be covered in a written employment agreement with your employees. Any variations that you make, if, for example, leave loading is an entitlement, you can include that in someone's pay, but you have to make sure that that's covered in an employment agreement so it's clear. And all of those layers can't be less than the layer below. So let's get straight into leave, because I think today we're going to go through all the different types of leave. I'm going to try and answer it in as much detail as possible. There were a couple of questions that came through that were about things like subsidies from the government and things like that, and that just changes all the time and can be different from each state. So I'll try and cover the things that are as universal as possible. So annual leave is usually the first one people think of when they think about leave, and it allows an employee to be paid while having time off from work. So full-time and part-time employees get 4 weeks per year of 20 days per year of annual leave based on their ordinary hours of work. So it's pro rata. So if you work 20 hours a week as a part-timer, you get 4 weeks of 20 hours annual leave. Casual employees are not entitled to annual leave, and annual leave is a benefit that is paid out upon termination of employment. Employees need to request to take annual leave before going on leave, and the process for requesting annual leave is often set out in an award or industrial agreement, but it also can be defined within a company policy or a contract of employment. So if you would like your employees to give a certain amount of notice for leave, you can outline that in a company policy, and in the employment agreement, you can state that the employee must follow company policy. So you might have a minimum of 4 weeks notice or a minimum of 8 weeks. You might want to also look at things like blockout time. So say, for example, you've worked in an accounting firm, end of financial year might be your busiest time of the year. So you might want to put in your policy that it would only be in extraordinary circumstances that someone would be allowed to take leave during that blackout period. Now, I think it's important to talk about the fact that an employer can only refuse a request for annual leave if that refusal is reasonable. So what does that look like? I would generally say if you've got a policy that says no leave can be taken in certain times, you're pretty safe in saying no. However, the term reasonable comes in. So if your employee comes to you and says, in 6 months' time, my sister has booked her wedding overseas in the week during the blackout period, it would be pretty unreasonable with 6 months' notice for you to say, no, you can't take that time off. So you need to consider all of the circumstances. So you might say it's a blackout period. Leave can only be taken with a lot of advance notice and with specific, exceptional circumstances as approved by management, or something along those lines. So it can't just be a blanket no. It can be a no, though, if people have given you less notice than what's in the policy and you can't cover their time off. It can also be a no even if they give you a lot of notice, but it would be unreasonable because 2 other employees already have asked for time off during that time. So you do have to take into consideration all of the circumstances before you refuse leave. Now, an employer can only direct an employee to take annual leave in certain situations. So one of those examples would be Christmas. So if you're closed over the Christmas New Year period, many industrial instruments allow you to direct employees to take annual leave during that period. I would always suggest you give as much notice as possible. Generally by about October, so going into the last quarter is usually a really good time to confirm with your employees if you are going to close during that period and that they will be required to take leave. I would also highly recommend that you tell any new employees that that will be the case, particularly if you close for 2 or 3 weeks, because that's a substantial part of somebody's leave. Now, there are a few public holidays in at that end of year period, but it is a substantial time to take off. And if an employee starts in the second half of the year, they might not have enough leave to cover it. So it is a really good idea to make it part of your onboarding to make it clear that you have that time off. There's also the circumstances when an employee has accumulated excess annual leave. Now, you can actually have set a policy in your business to say that anything, you want employees to generally keep their leave less than 4 weeks. So that can be a policy that you actually set, or no more than 8 weeks, for example, so that if an employee has more than that, they must have a plan in place to take leave. Most industrial instruments do have a clause in them that will talk about your ability to direct an employee to take excessive leave if they've got a high balance. Usually it's either 4, 6 or 8 weeks that must be left after they've taken their leave. So you can't direct them to take all of their leave. They must still have a portion left. So really make sure that you check your industrial instrument before you go about directing people to take leave. And it can certainly only be cashed out when an award allows it. And again, it may be only cashed out in specific circumstances and there must be a certain amount of leave left. Now, one of the questions that came up was tips for encouraging employees to take leave. So certainly putting some things in your policy around not having excessive leave, certainly encouraging people, really having those conversations and saying, you've got a lot of leave there. I want you to take it. Make it part of your culture. You need a break. Annual leave is there to take a break. And a lot of people didn't take it in the last 2 years during the pandemic because they couldn't go anywhere. But leave is not necessarily just there for when you want to go somewhere. It should be there to take a break from work so you don't burn out. So part of it can be part of your wellbeing program that you really encourage people to take leave. If an employee has a lot of leave there, sit down with them and have a chat to them about, are they wanting to keep it for a specific event? So, there's often times if someone wants to go and travel for an extended period of time or they want to go overseas, they might want to be saving it up for something. So sit down, and communication is always important. But if you've got someone that's got quite a bit of leave, remember every 3 months they're going to accumulate another week. So they need to have a plan of taking at least a week every quarter and more if you want to bring down their balance. So, you know, maybe it's some long weekends, maybe they have to plan 2 weeks off every quarter. So at least they're taking twice as much leave over that time. But communication is a really big part of that process. Now, one of the questions we do get that trips people up is around changing annual leave to another leave. So what happens when you've got an employee who's on approved annual leave and then they become ill, or there's another change in circumstances? We're going to talk about compassionate leave. So say, for example, a member of their close family dies or gets really sick. Can they change their leave? And the answer is yes. So if an employee is on annual leave and they become sick, they may change their leave from annual leave to personal leave. So they're recredited their annual leave and they're now taking personal leave. You can definitely request proof. And this applies to any time they're on any type of leave. They can change to a different type of leave if they've got proof they're entitled to it. Another example of that is when an employee is on annual leave because their partner has had a baby and they end up having a C-section. And so they need to become their primary carer for a period of time. They can actually apply to use some of their personal leave in those instances. Speaking of personal leave is probably the second most asked about leave we get, if not the first. So personal leave used to be referred to as sick leave, sometimes carers leave, but generally speaking, it is both sick leave and carers leave are covered under personal leave. It is there to let an employee take time off to help them deal with either a personal illness, caring responsibilities, or a family emergency. So if a person is not fit to attend work because they themselves are ill or injured, then it is sick leave. If they need to care for a member of their immediate family or household who is sick or injured, it's carers leave, and it also comes from personal leave. Or they need to help during a family emergency, that is also carers leave. Now, with a lot of issues during COVID, this comes up. So I want to be really clear that the laws around leave did not change during COVID. Personal leave and annual leave are still exactly the same as they were prior to COVID. The difference was that during COVID, we've had in most awards over the last 2 years, there has been something called pandemic leave. Now that's an unpaid leave. So an employee who has to take off time because they would otherwise be fit and well to work, but they have to isolate because of COVID due to the current restrictions that are in place, is entitled to unpaid leave. So essentially they're entitled to take that time off and have their job protected but not be paid. So the question often came up is, should they get, or they're isolating, should they get paid? Should they not get paid? What sort of leave can they use? And so it always came down to, are they fit for work? So if they would otherwise be able to attend work, if they weren't told to isolate because their family member was ill or tested positive, then they wouldn't be entitled to sick leave or personal leave because they were otherwise fit to work. But they could take annual leave if they wanted to get paid during that unpaid pandemic leave. If they then became ill themselves, that's when they were entitled to utilise their sick leave. And that would be the same as if they've had a family member who's got COVID, they are entitled to use their personal leave as carers leave to care for that family member. Now, the third one there during a family emergency is really interesting because that often causes some questions. A family emergency is where somebody is it's a change of circumstances at the last minute. So say that your mother-in-law normally looks after your child, your mother-in-law is sick and is unable to care for the child today, you don't have any other forms of childcare and you have to be their primary carer because it's an unexpected emergency, then you can utilise your carers leave. During COVID, if a childcare centre shut down unexpectedly, then yes, the first couple of days of that leave could definitely be carers leave because it was an unexpected emergency. We had one recently where a staff member wanted to take his carers leave because one of his children, his wife had some appointments, doctor's appointments to go to, and he needed to care for his daughter. Now, that one could go either way. If it's an unexpected appointment, so if his wife has suddenly become ill and she has to go and have some tests that were unexpected, that could potentially be under carers leave because it's not something you could plan for. However, If they were a dentist appointment that she had and she just wanted him to stay home for the day because she didn't want to take her child with her, that's annual leave. It's not unexpected. It's not an emergency situation, and it's something that could be planned around. So who does carers leave apply to in terms of who is an immediate family member or a household member? So an immediate family member could be a spouse, former spouse, de facto or former de facto, child, parent, grandparent, grandchild, sibling, or a child, parent, grandchild, sibling of your partner. This definition includes step relations as well as adoptive relations. And it's also important that it's also a member of that person's household. So you might have someone who lives in a share house with their 3 best friends and they're all from interstate. If they've got to stay home to care for someone in that household, they are allowed to utilise their carers leave. So all employees except casuals are entitled to personal leave. A casual is entitled to 2 unpaid days of personal leave if they're sick per occasion. So you can't just terminate them for not turning up to work if they provide evidence that they were unwell. Employees may have to give notice or evidence to get paid for their sick or carers leave. So what that means is they should, if you have a policy, you can set that policy that they must provide evidence every time or in certain circumstances. So after more than 2 days, that could be where it's either side of a weekend or a public holiday. So you can actually set that in your policies, or you could have it completely at discretion. So it's 10 days personal leave, full-time employees, pro rata for part-time employees. It starts accumulating from your employee's first day of work. You don't have to qualify for it. And it's based on your ordinary hours of work. So based on the ordinary hours of work that you've done, you will accumulate personal leave and annual leave as well as you work your hours. But it is not paid out upon termination. So if someone's never used a sick day, it's not paid out when they leave. So a couple of our most frequently asked questions around personal leave. How much notice do I need to be given? Well, it's very hard sometimes for people to know they're going to be sick or that they're going to have an emergency. So it's as much notice is reasonable. As soon as possible, they should let you know. I mean, you don't probably want someone calling you in the middle of the night, but they certainly should call you before the start of their expected start time. There may be circumstances where that can't be the case. Someone's in hospital or something like that. Generally speaking, I would say it is absolutely reasonable to expect the employee to contact you, not their mum, not their partner, unless they are unable to because of an illness or specific circumstances. It should be the employee. You can have a policy that says it must be a phone call and not a text. You might be happy to get a text. You can set that policy yourself. And they should probably try and specify for you how long they'll be off or expect to be off work. We get questions about evidence quite a bit. An employer can ask an employee to provide that evidence that shows that they were entitled to take the time off work. And I think that's important to note. There are an entitlement, but they're an entitlement under specific circumstances, and all the different leaves that we're talking about today. An employee is employed, particularly a permanent part-time or full-time employee, to be at work for a set number of hours per week. They can only be absent from work when they are on a type of authorised leave that we're talking about today. And as we go through these, you'll see there are different circumstances that apply. So sometimes we get questions like, oh, should it be annual leave or personal leave, or the employer, which one should has asked to take this one, is this right? You've always got to look at the circumstances and see whether or not there is a leave that applies, and if so, what is that leave? So if an employee is not able to work because of an illness or injury, or to support or provide care in an unaffected time, you can ask for evidence of that. Now, I know myself, I have 3 children. Whenever I go to the doctors with one of them, I almost every time get asked, do you need a certificate to say that you were here with your child today? So, it's not hard to get. And look, there are times when you generally know, I've got probably half of our team have either got the flu or COVID at the moment, and everyone's been sick, but they're genuinely sick, and I can hear that they're sick. I've spoken to them. I know they are sick. So I'm not asking them to provide me with any specific evidence. But there are particularly some industries that, people think that personal leave is 10 days extra leave, leave that they're entitled to take, like RDO. So, it's very, absolutely reasonable for you to say, can you provide me with evidence? Now, what is that evidence? A medical certificate or a statutory declaration? But it doesn't actually say under law that it has to be one of those, but it has to be something where a reasonable person would be expected to believe that that was from a genuine practitioner. And so we had one recently. It was from a Chinese medicine practitioner. Now, they were registered with Medicare and they had written a prescription, a certificate for absence. And we were asked, would that be okay? And we would generally say, yes, they're a registered practitioner. And, you know, for that particular employee, that may be who they go to for their medical advice. So, you know, you can ask for further information, but generally, it needs to be a reasonable form of evidence. And there was certainly times during, particularly around vaccinations, that we sometimes saw very dodgy form letters that were printed off the internet. So, you know, you can question something if you need to. Now, another one we get asked a lot is about attending medical appointments and elective surgery. So medical appointments and elective surgeries that are pre-arranged would only be covered by sick leave if the employee is not able to work because of a personal illness or injury. So again, you can ask for evidence from the employee to confirm they were unfit for work. And this can also help you decide whether or not they're paid sick leave or whether they utilise their annual leave. So a planned medical appointment, and I think, like, I will use a dentist appointment as an example here. So if someone booked themselves a dentist appointment in 6 weeks' time and they say, I need to take sick leave because I've got a dentist appointment, the answer would be no, that's annual leave. It's a planned dentist appointment for my regular checkup. Annual leave is not just there for holidays. It's not holiday pay. It is there just for you to do things, to have time off work when you need it. So a planned medical appointment is not going to be seen as sick leave. However, if you woke up with a raging infection in your tooth and your whole face has blown up, then you are unfit to attend work that day and you need to go to that appointment to have it treated. That would be where sick leave would come into it. Now, you know, elective surgeries is always interesting. Look, I think if someone needs to have an elective surgery, ideally you'll communicate with them. They're not going to have a lot of control over when it's going to be. Hopefully they can give you as much notice as possible. And look, if they have to have a surgeon appointment prior to their surgery, then that would be a medical appointment that they would take annual leave for. But on the day of surgery, I doubt very much they're going to be fit to attend work once they've had surgery. So the personal leave would probably start from that day. But it can be a little bit grey. And look, I think you need to err on the side of being generous to an employee. Most people don't have elective surgery for the fun of it. Now, if someone, I don't know, I don't want to be prejudiced against any types of surgeries, but I think you need to be open and generous when it comes to thinking about this. But at the same time, you're not expected, people are expected to try and make appointments outside of their work time. Now, if they work full time, that might be hard. Not everyone can work flexibly and work appointments in. But if that's the case, then they can take an annual leave day and do those sort of appointments if they need to. Now, I do want to talk about long-term sick leave because this does come up where you've got an employee that has a long-term illness or injury and they're off work for an extended period of time. And we often get asked the question, when can I terminate someone's employment? So if an employee is absent from work because they're sick or injured, they're actually protected from being dismissed, but not indefinitely. So as long as they're providing evidence of their illness or injury, they have that protection for being away for less than 3 consecutive months or less than 3 months over a total of 12 months. And they're still using their sick pay. So once they're on unpaid sick pay, so once you've utilised all of your entitlement for personal leave, as long as you provide evidence, you're entitled to be on unpaid sick leave. Now, up to the 3-month mark, you are protected. That person is just on unpaid sick leave. They're not going to be accruing annual leave or other types of leave while they're on unpaid sick leave, but they are entitled to that. Now, it could be up to 3 months over a 12-month period. So someone might not take it off consecutively, but they might have had quite a bit of time off over a 12-month period of unpaid sick leave. That's the time when you can start to explore whether or not this employee is likely to come back in the short or medium term. whether they'll be able to come back to their pre-existing job, and whether they'll still be able to meet the inherent requirements of their job. But you can't just get to the 3-month mark. I would never recommend getting to the 3-month mark, ticking a box and saying, yep, they're done, they're out. You need to at least have looked at, are they able to come back to work? You need to base that on medical evidence, not on your own speculation. We're not bush doctors. We don't get to make decisions about people's health and well-being. We need to make sure it's based on medical evidence. But if you've got someone, we've had a client that had someone who'd been in a car accident and they had a lot of injuries and they held their job and the real key here is communicating. You know, they sat down, they said, look, can we catch up and have a chat about where you're at? Like, let's do it over the phone. What's going to work for you? And most employees, if they know they're not going to be able to return to their job, are going to be really reasonable about it. But you do need to move cautiously. You don't want to move too quickly. You want to show that you've assessed all the circumstances before you make the decision to terminate someone in these circumstances. But you also don't have to keep someone on your books indefinitely if they can't return to their job. So we'll move on to compassionate leave. There was a time prior to the Fair Work Act where compassionate leave did come out of sick leave, but that's not the case now. So all employees, including casuals, are entitled to compassionate leave, which is also sometimes known as bereavement leave. So this is taken when a member of an employee's immediate family or household dies or contracts or develops a life-threatening injury or illness, a baby in their immediate family or household is stillborn, they have a miscarriage, or their current spouse or de facto partner has a miscarriage. They're entitled to compassionate leave. So the immediate family is the same definition that we had for personal leave in terms of carers leave. So they're entitled to 2 days of paid compassionate leave for each time they meet the criteria. So it's not like you can only do this once. If you happen to have a tragedy in your family where you lose, you know, a family member's got an illness and then a month later another family member passes away, they are entitled to either 2 separate 1-day periods or 1 continuous 2-day period for each time they meet the criteria, and anything additional as agreed by the employer. So again, if an employee is already on a different type of leave, personal leave or annual leave, and they're entitled to compassionate leave due to their personal circumstances, they can use that and change. And a casual obviously receives unpaid compassionate leave rather than paid compassionate leave. And you can ask for evidence. Look, it can be a lot trickier here, and I don't think this is the type of leave. I mean, you would know if someone lost 5 grandmothers, and look, I have seen people in my 25 years in HR that have tried to push the limit on some of these things, but genuinely speaking, I mean, you can ask for evidence, you can ask for, like, you know, evidence of a funeral or a stat dec or something like that, but I think you can genuinely tell when somebody is utilising this leave for the right reasons. I count on less than one hand the number of times I've seen someone try and use this as a way of getting additional leave. I think it takes a fairly callous person to do that. So we'll move on to parental leave, and this is probably another one that we get a lot of questions about. So parental leave is when employees either have a child who's born or adopted. So that leave can be taken either after the employee gives birth, their spouse or de facto gives birth, or they adopt a child that's under 16 years of age, and they're entitled to up to 12 months of unpaid parental leave, and they can request to top that up with an additional 12 months of unpaid leave. Now, parental leave is not so much an entitlement to leave, it's an entitlement to be absent from the workplace. So, you know, there are organisations will talk about paid parental leave, you can choose to pay it, but it is an unpaid entitlement, but it's an entitlement to be absent from work and have your job protected. Pandemic leave was similar. It was not an entitlement to take leave, it was an entitlement to be absent from work because of the circumstances that you were in. So all employees in Australia are entitled to unpaid parental leave, but there is a qualifying period. So if you've worked with your employer for at least 12 months before the date or expected date of birth, if you're pregnant, before the date of adoption, or when the leave starts, if the leave is taken after another person cares for the child or takes parental leave, we'll talk about that a little bit. And you will have you will have responsibility for the care of the child during that period. Casual employees are eligible for unpaid parental leave if they have been working for their employer on a regular and systematic basis for at least 12 months. Now, remember, a lot of people with long-term casuals just paid them JobKeeper in the last couple of years. So that's a pretty good indication that if they got JobKeeper, they would be considered as entitled to parental leave. And they have a reasonable expectation of continuing work in a regular and systematic basis once they return after the birth or adoption of their child. So continuous parental leave is where one parent is taking it for 12 months, 24 months if it's agreed, and it can be one continuous period or include a flexible period of 30 days, and we'll talk about that in a moment. It usually starts 6 weeks before the birth or placement of the child. Now, in an adoption situation where the person is not going to give birth, they might work right up until the day or as close to it as they want to. In terms of an employee who is pregnant, we'll talk about safe jobs in a moment, but you can ask for medical clearance for them to work in that last 6 weeks if you have concerns. One of my team basically worked up until the day she gave birth. I said, you can work up as long as you feel comfortable and you finish when you feel comfortable. So often a leave in regards to parental leave has a sliding date, but you need to have a fairly good idea when it's going to start. So concurrent leave can be taken by both parents at the same time. If they're married or in a de facto relationship, they can take up to 8 weeks at the same time. And this can start on the birth or placement of the child earlier than that date if the employer agrees, or later than that date, but it must be within the 12 months of the birth or the placement. So it can be split up into 2-week periods. So for example, if one partner has a child, gives birth, the other partner can take up in 2-week lots. They might take 4 weeks at the beginning and 4 weeks 6 months in or something like that. But you could agree to shorter lengths of time at the same time if you wanted to. Flexible parental leave is something a little newer, and it's where an employee can take up to 30 days of their 12-month unpaid parental leave flexibly up to their child's second birthday or the second anniversary of their adoption. It can be taken as a continuous period of 1 day or longer, separate periods of 1 day or longer. Essentially, you can come back a little bit early. Say you take 12 months parental leave, you might come back after 11 months and you can keep 30 days up your sleeve for the next 12 months that you can take in periods of time, when you need to, over, as you transition back to work or over that child's early life. So the other thing too is that 2 parents can split parental leave. I didn't really touch on that. So for example, 2 partners, one can do, a couple can split the time. So one person can take 6 months and the other person can take 6 months, and they're both entitled to have that with their separate employers, but it can't be longer than 2 years in total together. And it can't be at the same time other than that 8 weeks that I just mentioned before. But flexible parental leave might be something that people in the future might want to take more often, where they might want to hold a little bit of extra leave up their sleeve while their kids are little and they might need some extra days off and they're having to transition them into childcare or different issues like that. So I want to talk briefly about a safe job, because all pregnant employees, including casuals, are entitled to a safe job if it isn't safe for them to continue to do their usual job. So that includes employees that aren't eligible for unpaid parental leave. Anyone that is pregnant is entitled to be safe in their job. So expectant mothers can keep doing the same things at work in the same way, usually. You're not sick, you're pregnant. But for some women, they might need to change parts of their work or stop doing certain things to enable them to stay safe in their job. So for example, you might need to review what duties they do, their hours of work, use of work equipment, travel arrangements, work environment. There may be some tweaks that you need to make to someone's job during that period of pregnancy. And you might need to make change if the work involves a lot of climbing of stairs, working in hot environments, working with animals, heavy lifting, using pesticides, working in inappropriate facilities. You've got to make assessments as you go, and it is on you as an employer to make adjustments during this period of time. And this can be a negotiated process, and it's usually something I would highly recommend that you get some advice around if you have any concerns. Not an easy topic, and I do apologise to anyone that may find this hard, but if an employee's baby is stillborn or their child dies within the first 24 months of life, they can still take up to 12 months of unpaid parental leave. Parents can agree with their employers to put their unpaid parental leave on hold if their child must remain in hospital after birth. So, for example, a premature birth. Special maternity leave is available for miscarriage and other pregnancy-related illnesses. So there is an opportunity if someone does miscarry to take some specific leave. And compassionate leave is also available in the event of a miscarriage for both the employee and their partner. So when it comes to notice, how much notice can you expect? Well, at least 10 weeks before, you can ask your employee to provide you written notice, including their intended start and finish dates. You know, at least 4 weeks before the leave, you'd like that to be kind of confirmed. If there's any changes to the dates, they should let you know as soon as possible. You know, things happen in pregnancies. You know, my daughter's half sister was supposed to be a birthday present in September, and she was born a Christmas present. She was born 12 weeks early in September. So that was like literally within 24 hours this baby was born. So things will change. You've got to, the further it gets in the pregnancy, the more it's more likely to change. And particularly for a partner, like a partner, we used to do a thing before they were online where we just they'd fill in their leave form and I'd have it sitting on my desk as the HR manager, and they'd just let me know when the day they started, babies come, we'd write that first date in and it would start from that date. You need, again, if you want to take concurrent leave, at least 10 weeks notice for the employer. If you are splitting it up, you want to try and give at least 4 weeks notice. But I'll be honest, it's about communication. Communicate. Like, you know, normally employees tell their employees quite early they're pregnant. Sometimes that's when we get a panicked call from the employer going, oh, what do I need to do? And the thing is, you just need to communicate. But, you know, it's not often you get, you know, 6 or 7 months notice that somebody might be leaving you, and you've got plenty of time to plan for it. And you just need to be realistic that towards the end it can be a little trickier. It might be that, you know, if it's a tough pregnancy, employees might want to reduce their hours down. With my second pregnancy, I was so sick and I reduced my hours. Like I went down to part-time for the second half of my pregnancy. They still had me there, but I got to have more rest and I was able to work through my pregnancy because of it. So one of the things I think people forget about when it comes to parental leave is they're all worried about up until the baby's born, but they don't actually think about the actual parental leave itself. So you want to make sure you stay connected. Ask your employees how they want to, do they want to keep in touch while they're on parental leave? Most people do. Most people don't want to lose their connection to work. Ask how they want to stay in touch. So you are actually entitled under the Fair Work Act. Employees are entitled to keeping in touch days. And that can be up to 10 days during their 12-month period where they can actually come in and be paid for the day without it affecting their parental leave, unpaid or even paid by the government. And it might be because they're going to come in and participate in a planning day or do some training themselves or attend a conference. It's about keeping people in touch with their jobs. We have not had I've had a number of my team who've had babies during the 9 years we've had Strawberry Seed. We always invite them to social events. We invite them to training days if they want to come in for a while with the baby, or if we're having an online conference. I don't think we had a team meeting without a baby in it for about 3 years. That baby just got passed around the room. You know, stay in touch. Now, some people might not want it. They might have a difficult baby. They might not be interested, but you should put the offer out there and communicate. And it's what keeps that connection to work. Keep them on email lists. Make sure they're still getting, it's about saying there's no obligation for you to do it, but we're still going to let you know of stuff that's happening. You know, Christmas parties and things like that. So it's really good to stay in touch and let them know that there's the option to coming in and doing a few things while they're on parental leave to stay in touch with their job. Now, government-funded parental leave, we have had change of government on the weekend. So, you know, it's something that you always need to check. An employee may be eligible for up to 18 weeks of leave. To be eligible, they must be the primary carer of a newly born baby or adopted child, have met the income and work tests, and they are set by the government, not be working during their paid parental leave except for allowable reasons such as those keeping in touch days, and have registered or applied to register the child's birth in their state of territory. For a dad or partner, pay is up to 2 weeks, and it's the minimum wage basically for those 2 week period. Now, it's really, really important to note that the employee is the one that applies for this. You don't have to do anything. As an employer, if your employee is eligible, you will get a letter telling you that that employee is going to receive that pay. Now, for casual employees, they might receive it directly, but part of it is trying to keep a connection between employees and employers. So there is a fair chance that you will be expected to pay it through your payroll. And look, is it a bit painful to set up? Yes, it is, because it's through a government website, which is not easy to navigate. And I, as someone who had to go through it, the first time I went through it, I ended up having to pick up the phone, and I found a great, lovely young guy that worked for the government who stepped me through the process of setting it up, because there's about 3 different systems you have to navigate. But once it's set up, it's the same every time. And so literally you will get sent a letter telling you that your employee is eligible, when the payments will start. They put the money in your bank account prior to the pay. So you're just passing on the government's money to the employee. It's not costing you anything. You're just passing on that money on behalf of the government through your payroll. So the money arrives in your bank account a few days before your payroll. I really highly recommend getting a bookkeeper to set that up properly for you as well. And that is for the first 18 weeks of leave. So, you know, you can top that up. As an employer, you do have options of topping it up at part pay. Some employees might want to, as I said, it's unpaid leave. So some might want to access their annual leave or long service leave if they've been with you a long time as well as this. But, you know, there are instructions, and, you know, it is something that you need to rely on the information you're given, and it can change. It's changed that many times. In my 25 years in HR since it first came in. I think the first baby bonus came in when I was pregnant with my son, and he'll be 18 in July. So there's been many variations in that time. So when it comes to parental leave, just a couple of things to remember. Employers can't discriminate against someone who's pregnant. You cannot make, you know, they're an employee. They don't have an illness, they are pregnant. So you have to ensure that you're not doing anything to discriminate against them. So any decisions you make about them during the period of their pregnancy need to be based on actual issues, not on the fact that they're pregnant. Employers can't change someone's job while they're on leave. They're entitled to return to their previous job that they held. Or if that job does not exist, at least an equivalent job. And that's something that, you know, you might have to navigate. But often you would put someone on, say, a 12-month, 6 or 12-month contract during that parental leave period, but they are entitled to return to their job. You can't make someone work in an unsafe environment while they're pregnant. And yeah, I've got an extra line in there that I don't know why it's there. Employees can't work for another employer while they're on parental leave without management approval. They can't go and take another job unless you've approved it. If they're on unpaid parental leave with you, that would be a breach of their contract. And they can't breach any other company policies and procedures. They're still an employee during that period. I'm going to briefly touch on long service leave, only because it is different laws in each state and territory, and it's really hard to go into detail. So generally speaking, after working for an employer for a long period of time, an employee is entitled to long service leave. Now, there are some industries, such as the construction industry, that have long service leave schemes that employees can pay into. But for those that don't have those, it's usually between 7 and 10 years, depending on the state, that an employee is able to either take or at least get paid out pro rata on long service leave. And so each state's going to set out what those rules are and how much long service leave they get. And in some states and territories, long serving casuals are eligible for long service leave. So if you have been in business and you have employees that have been with you longer than 7 years, there's a fair chance that it's going to be something that affects you, and you need to be putting that leave aside and accruing that leave. So it doesn't surprise you, because it may, you know, depending on the state, you might have to pay it out pro rata after 7 years. So it's something you should be talking to your accountant about. Community service leave. So it's also known as voluntary emergency management in this one. So if an employee is engaged in a voluntary emergency management activity, what does that look like? The activity involves dealing with an emergency or natural disaster. The employee engages in the activity on a volunteer basis. The employee is either requested to engage in an activity, or it would be reasonable to expect that such a request would have been made if the circumstances had permitted. And the employee is a member of or has been a member of a like association recognised with emergency management. So SES, CFA, RSPCA, take the floods that we've recently had in some states in Australia. If someone works for the SES, they are entitled to take community service leave to attend that and be paid to attend those emergency services things, but it can't just be as a volunteer, you know, at a random thing. Like, it has to be because they're part of that sort of organisation, and you know who your employees are. Black Saturday bushfires here in Victoria, there was a lot of employees in my employer at the time that were CFA volunteers, and they had to drop everything. And so, look, you know, they will let you know if they can. But generally speaking, I think you'll know who, particularly if you're a regional business, you will know who might be called up in those situations, but it's usually all hands on deck. Jury duty also comes under community service leave. So employees, including casuals, can take leave to attend jury selection or jury duty. They need to advise you of their period of expected leave as soon as possible. If an employee requests that they need to provide they need to provide evidence that they attended that leave. Full-time, so in terms of jury duty, apart from jury duty, community service leave is unpaid. You can choose to pay it as an employer if you like, but it is unpaid. Now, with jury duty, again, there's different state and territory-based laws, but full-time and part-time employees have to be paid make-up pay, like the difference to what they're getting paid to be on the jury for the first 10 days of jury selection. And there's paperwork that goes along with it. There is no limit to an amount of community service leave an employee can take. If an employee is called up for jury duty and they are an essential employee to you, you can write them a letter. I did that recently for one of my team and asked that they be excused in this instance, and it was accepted. So, yeah, it's something just to be aware of that does come up. Family and domestic violence leave. All employees, including part-time and casual, are entitled to 5 days unpaid family and domestic violence leave each year. Employees are entitled to 5 full days from the start of the day that they work. They don't have to build up over time, and they renew every 12 months, but they don't accumulate. Early this month, Fair Work Commission issued a provisional decision to include paid family and domestic violence leave in awards for permanent employees. This is still provisional. It has not been approved as yet, so you need to watch this space because it could become paid leave. And some employers are choosing to make it paid leave as a voluntary thing as well. So employees can take this type of leave if they need to do something to deal with the impact of family and domestic violence, and it's impractical to do it outside their hours of work. So that could include making arrangements for their own safety or that of a close relatives, attending court hearings or accessing police services. It doesn't need to be taken all at once and can be taken in single or multiple days. Now, we always get a big question about unpaid leave. There is no entitlement to unpaid leave unless it's otherwise covered in another leave category. So we've covered a number of leaves that are unpaid leave, but they are within their own categories, such as community services leave or parental leave. Unpaid personal leave only applies when there's evidence provided, so that has to be evidence. But generally speaking, no one is entitled to unpaid leave. Is discretionary because, as I mentioned earlier, an employee is employed to be at work for the number of hours you've employed them. And they can't just say, oh, well, I want to take 6 weeks leave. I've only got 4. I'm happy to take the last 2 weeks as unpaid leave. You might be happy with that and you might be happy to approve it, but you don't have to. You can just approve the 4 weeks leave that they are entitled to take and say, well, I'm sorry, I'm only approving 4 weeks leave. It is not okay for someone to just make that assumption. So one of the part of communicating, and I think setting up these expectations with employees around leave is communication. If you want to take more than your entitlement, before you book anything or make assumptions, talk to us. Check with us first. We might be okay with it. I've got an employee on long-term unpaid leave at the moment for some personal issues, and then she'll come back later in the year. But, you know, it should only be after every other type of leave is exhausted. No one should be on an unpaid leave if they have annual leave there to be taken. Full stop. No one should be on unpaid leave for sick leave unless they have other leave there to be taken. Now, when it came to COVID, pandemic leave was unpaid, so an employee could just choose to take the unpaid time and not use their other leave. That was their entitlement. But that's going to sunset at this stage at the end of June in all awards. So, you know, ultimately, when it comes to unpaid leave, I know there are people like, oh, I'm saving that, I want to keep it for something else. Well, no, that's not their choice to how much additional leave they take off. If they're employed in a full-time capacity, they're employed to be there for 48 weeks a year, apart from the 4 weeks of annual leave they're entitled to, and any other leave that they're entitled to because of those specific circumstances. So it is at the discretion of an employer, and there are some times that you have to explain that to employees. So what should you do if you're unsure of entitlements? Get some HR support, get some advice. That's what we're here for. A lot of the questions that we field here at Strawberry Seed are around paid leave, unpaid leave. What is the leave that applies in this situation? Contact your industry body for advice. So if you're a member of an industry association, it's really good to utilise them for advice. And in fact, we provide advice for a couple of industry associations. And contact the Fair Work Ombudsman. There is some good information online. You can use their chat, you can use their help. You know, these laws are universal, so they do apply across the board. That's all I'm going to cover today, and I'm going to check and see whether we have any questions that anybody would like answered. So far, there are no questions. Please feel free to throw some in the chat or the Q&A if you do have any that we haven't covered. Our next webinar will be in 4 weeks' time, and we're going to be talking about award increases. The 1st of July every year, the minimum wage goes up and award rates go up. So our next webinar in June, we'll be talking about some of the things you need to think about as we go into that time. We'll talk about how you make sure employees are still classified correctly, are getting the right amount. I'd love to give you a prediction on what that increase is going to be. Given we've just had a change of government, I don't think we will find out till probably at least mid-June, maybe, unless they move quite quickly, what the increase will be. The last 2 years have been quite low. I haven't kept up with the cost of living, so I think it'll be watch this space to see what they end up being. And pretty much, if there's a 3% increase, then every award category will go up 3%. So at a minimum, you need to check that your employees are still paid well. And they're the things that we're going to talk about in the June webinar. And we will send a copy of this webinar out to you along with a link that will allow you to book early to get in for that one if you like, and a copy of the slides. And if you have any questions, I still can't see any questions in the box at the moment, so I'm going to assume that no one has any questions. So if there are no other questions, I'll just stay online for a little bit if anyone wants to send me a private chat. But look, at Strawberry Seed, we offer a free, obligation-free chat with any new client anyway, or if you're an existing client, pick up the phone and ask us. We can help you chat through what the issues are, how to navigate different issues, particularly if it's something tricky like long-term sick leave, or it's something complicated around parental leave. You're better off getting advice before you talk to the employee. The employee might be getting hearsay information or tell you something that doesn't sound right. Just check your thinking. I do encourage that you follow us on our social media up there on the screen. We're always sharing articles and things, particularly on LinkedIn and Facebook, about different issues and cases that arise that you might find interesting. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. Unless, as I said, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending, and we hope to see you at our next webinar in June. Thank you.